Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Mum and Son Run podcast. I'm getting used to saying that now. In this episode, we're talking about injuries. Now, unfortunately, running is a high impact activity, so it has a fairly high injury rate, which me and my mum have both experienced firsthand. In this episode, we're going to be giving you our tips and tricks to avoid and limit injury, whilst also giving you some advice and guidance on what to do when you are injured. My mum is currently rehabbing a ruptured Achilles, so it's been a long and hard journey. So we're getting into all the juicy stuff. It's a fun episode. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Episode 3, things are getting serious. So this week we're going to touch on injuries and taking time away from running. Unfortunately, running is a high impact sport, and at some point in your running career, you're likely to experience some kind of injury or setback, it's safe to say. And we were going to touch on a few of our own experiences and how we dealt with that, how it impacted us mentally and physically, maybe some mistakes that we made or some things that we did right to help us recover. But ultimately, it's a little bit embarrassing that me and you are creating a running podcast because neither of us have done a whole lot of running in 2025 for completely different reasons. So let's start off with you. We've touched on it a tiny bit in episode 1. But towards the back end of last year, around October time, you ruptured your Achilles at a boot camp class. And I don't know if you knew at the time, I definitely didn't, how extreme of an impact that would have on your life and the road to recovery that would need for you to get fully back to fitness. So talk a little bit about that initial moment and then maybe touch a bit on the impact it had psychologically, going from being running 4 times a week to, oh, I can't run at all, and the timeline for me to get back to running is way off in the distance.
So the last time I ran was October the 29th, 2024. And the following day, as you say, at a exercise class, I snapped my Achilles, my left Achilles completely. Knew that that's what it was pretty much instantaneously. Well, once I checked behind me to make sure nobody had hit me with a baseball bat, I knew that it was my Achilles that had gone. And boy,
Did you hear something?
I heard the
Yeah.
bang. I heard a bang. The lady behind me, who was a nurse, also heard it. And the lady that ran the class as well was a nurse. So I feel quite fortunate in many, many ways. I could have been anywhere when I ruptured that Achilles, but I was in the company of 2 nurses. Not only was the class leader a nurse, but she also had a set of crutches with her, which is just unbelievable, really.
Suspicious, this class, really, if you ask me. It all seems a bit suspicious. I
Well,
think
it was
you've
in
been
a
set
church.
up
It was
here.
in a church hall, and she had like
A
lots
lot
of
of people get injured at her classes, so she brings crutches to every class. It's
not
not a
at
good
all.
advertisement, this mum.
Not at all. No, she runs
No, I know they were
a
really good with
brilliant
you.
class. And yeah, she was phenomenal. You know, she had ice packs and she had bandages and she elevated my foot and did all of that good stuff that, you know what, if you're gonna rupture your Achilles, I'd want to rupture it in someone like Joe's company, to be perfectly honest. And I had good friends around me as well who kind of gave me lots of moral support at the time. Um, so that took me to A&E and a 7-hour stint in A&E where they confirmed what I already knew, which was they did a couple of tests and confirmed that my Achilles was ruptured and put me into plaster. And I stayed in plaster for the best part of a week. And when I went back to the fracture clinic, they took the plaster off and the consultant did a re-diagnosed a ruptured Achilles, and he put me into a Vacaped boot, which is a boot that has varying angles that allow your Achilles fibers to kind of be placed close together so that they can knit back the best that they can. Um, and that's where, I won't lie, it was a nightmare.
So, had you been given a timeline at this point? What do you remember when you were speaking to the doctor and being told this is when you're going to be able to walk again or run again?
I think I didn't know until I visited the fracture clinic a week later and I went into the boot. I had no idea really that I was going to be non-weight bearing for 6 weeks. That I was going to be injecting myself with blood thinning injections for 6 weeks, and that only at the end of 6 weeks would I be coming out of the boot and able to bear weight, any weight at all, onto the injured leg. I had no clue. Um, Obviously, at the fracture clinic, I asked that all important question: when will I be able to run again? And he looked at me like I was mental. Why would I be asking that question when I can't even walk? And he said, May 2025 at the very earliest. And that was like a dagger to my heart, really, because as you've just said on the intro, you go from running 4 times a week, it being an integral part of your life, both from a health and fitness point of view and also from a social point of view, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's wiped away. It's not like when you take an opportunity to maybe diversify from running or stop running for a while and do other things. I'm going from kind of running 25, 30 miles a week to sitting on a bed. So mentally, that took a lot of adjustment. You don't have any choice, so you've got to do it. So I pretty quickly kind of thought, well, you can either sit on this bed and feel really sorry for yourself, or you can think about what can I do, or what do I need to do that will improve my mental state and also my physical state. And so for me, that was a couple of things. And this wouldn't be for everybody. Some people might want to stay involved in the running world all the way through their injury. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just park it on one side. It was far too painful to be looking at people's runs on Strava, watching my watch telling me that I was starting to be detraining, watching my VO2 max go down, all of that. So for me, very personally, as I've said, I made a decision that I didn't really want to think about running. I just had to put that onto one side, and then I started to think about, well, what can you do? And I knew that, with some kind of challenges, because crutches take an awful lot of getting used to. They take some upper body strength and getting up and down stairs. Everything suddenly became, uh, a real mountain to climb, from standing in the bathroom brushing your teeth to the fact that you can't even go in the shower because you can't get the boot wet. I couldn't take the boot off. I was under strict instructions. You don't remove the boot unless you're changing the liner, and that's few and far between. So
Yeah, you smell it. You've not had a shower for 5 months.
I basically didn't. Well, I didn't have a shower. I didn't have I had to have a wash in the sink every day for 6 weeks. I've never been so pleased to go in a shower in my life. Um, but I knew there was things that I could do. I knew that there was, so I made it my business then to start looking at what could I do from a non-weight bearing exercise point of view. And there was lots that I could do. And then you discover people who've been in the same situation as you. So, that helps you to feel, not that you want anybody else to have suffered what you've suffered, but um, you just know then that you're not on your own. I think that's always a good place to go to when you know that there's people similar to you, that have had injuries that have completely taken them away from running. Like
They
most.
say like when you looking to buy a certain car or you buy a car, you start to see that car everywhere.
Yeah,
Suddenly you're noticing people in boots everywhere as well and
yeah,
thinking, okay, I'm not
and
the only one.
absolutely. And people would come and and chat with me about the boot and the amount of times that people said, "Have you snapped your Achilles?" I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't feel sorry for myself for a few days, because I did. Um, it's like a lot of things really. There's that period of kind of readjustment and acceptance that, well, this is what it is, and you can either wallow, or you can think about how best you can look after yourself. And so pretty quickly I kind of developed a routine that replaced running, of my non-weight bearing exercises on one day, and then coupled with some upper body strength exercises. We're lucky enough that during lockdown we kind of invested a little bit in a few bits of kit to have at home. So we've got a bench and a few dumbbells and a few kettlebells and all that kind of stuff. So I just developed a program for myself that, as much just to give myself something to focus on as it was about actually getting myself any stronger at the time. Um, and that became fundamental in my recovery really. And it's amazing really how very quickly you can go from it's such a shock that you've done it to at that acceptance stage. And we borrowed a wheelchair from a friend, and I started to get out and about. I couldn't get trousers on over the boots, so I've spent a full winter wearing shorts, which has been interesting, including going to the football, which um, was incredibly interesting. But there's a story in itself. So nothing to do with running, but the football club that I support were brilliant in giving me a spot in the disabled section, giving us a space and a seat, so that we could both sit in the disabled section for home matches. And there I met people who, they're not just in a wheelchair for a few weeks, they're in a wheelchair permanently, and that
Mm-hmm.
gives you
That
that.
perspective that you needed, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. You know that there are many, many people that are worse off than you, and there you are. We sat with those people, and I'm not saying for a minute that they would consider themselves to be worse off than anybody, because actually they were really positive, friendly, welcoming, and incredibly funny people and that turned out to be one of the highlights of the whole thing. Was they are still I class them as football friends now. I call and see them before we go to our season ticket seats. I call and see them and say hello, and they're always asking, "How are you getting on? How's your foot?" etc. They're really interested, genuinely. So, there's always kind of elements of anything in life that actually are a real positive, and that was one of them. Um, and so, it's not been easy because of the fact that my social life just disappeared in the blink of an eye. That was really shit. I just had to adjust to the fact that, you know, you've got a job to do here, and actually what you can do is focus on getting yourself back as strong as you were before. And there's no guarantees of that. I know that with an Achilles, it just depends on how it's mended. And I won't know that for some months, but I'm working on the basis that if I do everything that I can possibly do from an exercise perspective, then I'm giving myself the best chance that I'll get back to running and I'll be as good as I was previously, if not better.
Yeah, and that's the perfect attitude to take, that there's still lots that's within your control, and there's a few things that aren't. But if you control the controllables, then you can live with the result, because you know that you know, you did what you could in that situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember when it happened, I know how big a part of your life exercise is and being active, and I knew it was going to hit you hard. But I think one of the first things I said to you was, okay, well, this is an opportunity to work on some of your strengths. So get in the gym and get your upper body nice and strong. And, It didn't take you very long at all to be in the gym, lifting weights, strengthening areas that maybe you don't usually give as much time to, and just focusing on what you could do rather than what you couldn't do. So yeah, I think you handled it like an absolute pro, and have continued to, and you're at the point now where you're walking without a limp and you're doing long walks and back to being active, which is great, and you're back in the gym and you're on the leg press machine, and your commitment and dedication to the rehab process has been unbelievable. So for anyone out there kind of in the position where you're currently injured, focus on what you can do. Do the basics, keep your mental health in check, and try and find something else that you can do, and be creative in, that gives you some purpose and some drive. And yeah, if you are injured, just know that, it gets better with time, and it's just about having the right attitude to get yourself back to being fully fit. And that kind of brings us on to the different types of injuries. So you obviously had an injury that just completely swept your legs from under your feet, and
Literally.
quite literally, yeah, you had an exercise class that swept your legs from under your feet.
Yeah.
And you went from training all the time, running all the time, to no running. Whereas my experience with injuries in the running world so far, I haven't had anything as extreme as you've had, touch wood. But I had an injury during one of my marathon preps, and I think it's important that we kind of talk about how to approach an injury and the things that you can do that will help along the way. So I started to feel some knee pain on the outside of my knee when I was training for the Milton Keynes Marathon, and it slowly crept up more and more, and on some runs it would be fine, so I would push it, and then on the next run it wouldn't be fine and I would have to stop multiple times. And eventually I did some research and established that it was IT band syndrome. So I started to look at ways that I could solve it, but what I didn't do was cut back my mileage or change my plan in any way to accommodate for this injury that had come up. So I was running through pain constantly, but I was doing all of the exercises outside of my runs, the glute bridges, the side planks with a leg raise, trying to strengthen up my glutes. But the fact that I wasn't pulling back my mileage was a big issue and meant that I couldn't properly recover. And this ultimately hindered my whole marathon prep. So if you are kind of feeling the beginnings of an injury, do the right things early. I mentioned in the last episode Paula Radcliffe, world record holder, one of the greatest runners of all time, saying you're better off getting to the start line a little less fit but not injured than being injured but being slightly fitter. So I can remember doing a 30k long run around Albert Park. For any F1 fans listening or watching, that's the Melbourne Grand Prix track. It's a great place to run. But I was doing laps around the lake, and every 5k I was having to stop and I was in pain. And not only did this hinder my marathon through not actually giving me that consistent mileage on my feet because I've had to stop. So although I ended up running 30k, it was broken up with rest and recovery in between, which is different to running 30k, just having that big block on your feet, because that ultimately prepares you to run those long distances in your marathon. It also just meant that I made my injury worse. So I had the mindset of, if I don't run, then I'm falling behind. So regardless of the injury, I was like, well, I've got this plan and I need to follow this plan and keep running, or I'm not going to get this sub-3 marathon that I wanted. And actually, that mindset is probably what stopped me from getting a better result, because the injury lingered around for longer, because I wasn't willing to make those changes when they came around. so it impacted my training for a longer amount of time. So I guess the story here is, if you do have an injury, do something about it early on. It's difficult to do. It's really mentally challenging to be in the middle of a marathon prep and to slow things down or to take your foot off the gas. But it's really, really beneficial to do that at the start rather than aggravating and maybe making the injury worse and making it harder to recover from. So learn from my mistakes and be smarter than I was, which isn't difficult. But what would you say, Mum, are some of the best tools you've used when you've been feeling an injury coming along, or even just to prevent injuries in the first place? What comes to mind when you think of like the best way to manage or limit injuries?
I suppose not increasing mileage too quickly. I think there's a kind of a red flag straight away, that if you go out and increase your mileage disproportionately, that you could be injured. You could end up with an injury. Strength and conditioning obviously is there's lots of kind of documented evidence now that strength and conditioning kind of helps you to fatigue less and therefore remain uninjured. And I think there's for me, when you were talking just then, I went straight in my mind to, and there's the beauty of having a running coach, because I think that although as bad as kind of having an injury like mine is, I didn't have any choice but not to run. I couldn't even walk, let alone run. Whereas when you've got the kind of injury you're talking about, those niggly injuries, there's always that voice in your head says, am I just being a bit of a wimp not going out? The way you do when you've got a sniffle, or you're feeling a bit under the weather. You don't quite know, and you've got this plan in front of you and it says you should be going out and running, and then all of a sudden you're questioning whether you should be. But the plan says I should be doing this, I should be running 5 miles today, I should be doing my long run, etc. And you just don't know what to do. And I think for me, leading up to the Rome Marathon and up to London, I had a running coach for both of those, and I probably found it more beneficial for that running coach to navigate me through injuries and through those colds and little bugs, and just navigating my way around them, and being able to kind of not completely derail my plans, but to just tweak them a little bit where they needed tweaking. And for me, that was priceless. You've not got anything to prove to anybody. If you're feeling a bit of an injury, then that's your body's way of telling you that it's not happy about something.
Yeah.
So listen to it.
Yeah.
Listen to it. And there is no benefit in, and I've done it, don't get me wrong. I've run through niggles, and probably running through niggles was what put me in where I was with my snapped Achilles. You know, I'd had some gluten, some hamstring kind of twinges earlier in the year, and I'd listened to them, but I'd have listened to them as much as I should have done? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I didn't, because I wanted to carry on running. I didn't want to be, I, you know, I love it so much, and I love what it gives me in my life, and I didn't want not to be running. And ironically, what did I do? I did all the things that basically put me in a position where I can't run.
Yeah.
Lesson learned. Even at the grand old age of 60, you can have been running over 20 years, and you're learning every day.
Every day is a school day. And yeah, you can ignore those red flags. Your body's telling you, it's giving you a sign. Something's not right here. And if you don't have a coach or the right way of approaching it yourself, then you can ignore those red flags, even though you know they're red flags. You can convince yourself, no, I'm okay. I can run through this. This is something that'll just I can run this off. But having a coach to talk you down to make the big decisions, ultimately that's when a coach comes in handy the most. Because if you're chasing a time or chasing a result, and you'll do anything to get that result, you sometimes are not always acting in a way that benefits you. So yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. Not increasing your mileage too quickly. So there's a general rule of thumb which isn't for everybody, but they say around 10% per week. Don't increase your weekly mileage by 10% each week. And that's not the same for everybody, because somebody might be starting out and doing 1 or 2 runs a week, and then 10% of what they're running, if they're running 5 miles in a week, it's not a whole lot to add on, and you can add a little more. But definitely towards those higher mileages, I would say 10% is definitely more applicable. The strength training absolutely is going to help you to avoid injury. So making sure those muscles that take a lot of force through them when you're running, your calves, glutes, hamstrings, quads, are all being strengthened, and you're including a lot of single leg exercises, and strengthening your core as well is crucial. The other thing that can be useful for somebody who is feeling a bit of an injury or is injured, depending on the injury, is to use cross training. So to jump on a bike, riding a bike is much less high impact than running, and might not aggravate your injury in the same way. Obviously, be careful when you're doing these things, but even something like a cross trainer, swimming, really low impact, that can help you to move in the right direction and continue to build up your aerobic base and continue to build your muscular endurance, but without aggravating the injury further. So I would say cross training is a really useful tip to go alongside that. The other thing that I would suggest is focusing on nutrition. So making sure that if you do have an injury, that your body has all of the energy, so you're eating enough calories, nutrients that it needs to recover as fast as it can and as efficiently as it can. If you're neglecting that side of things, you could be prolonging the time that you're injured, and you don't want that. And the obvious one is resting when you need to rest, and sleep. Sleep is the king when it comes to recovery and making sure that you're in a good position to run. So it's something that definitely shouldn't be neglected. But I think that pretty much covers everything that we wanted to touch on. We wanted to talk about the different types of injuries, how it might impact you psychologically, but maybe the right mindset to take and perspective is key when you are in those moments. And then we also wanted to touch on, obviously, the injuries that maybe you could run through. Maybe you can still do a bit of running that doesn't take you out of the game, but if you handle it the right way, you can continue moving forwards. If you don't, it could be the reason that you show up on race day and you're either undertrained or you're just injured and not likely to finish. So, or even if you're not training for a race, just being able to go out consistently and run, all of the things we just mentioned are going to be really useful to limit injury and to help you whilst you're injured to stay running for a very long time, which is obviously what we all want.
Of the running friends I have, there are those exceptions that never seem to get an injury, but for the vast majority of people, there are some niggles along the way at least to be negotiated. So it is an inevitable part. It's just about how you successfully navigate your way around those injuries, and in the best way that you possibly can for you. And everybody's different, so my journey won't have been for everybody, but there were certain things that just kept me on the straight and narrow, and focused my mind towards getting back to being fit and well.
Absolutely. And I think like the perfect way to end it is just to say that if you are injured or feeling like something's not quite right, seeing a physio sooner rather than later and seeing a professional in that area, don't just message a random PT, don't just message somebody who you know who he runs quite a lot, maybe I'll just speak to him. It's really important to find a good physio, and you're much better off going earlier and striking whilst the iron's hot, and really getting on top of that injury from the off and knowing, okay, I have an IT band issue. That means I have weak glutes. So what I'm going to do is do these particular exercises to build up my glute strength, and then limit the injury from getting any worse. So that is the best piece of advice that I can give you, is if you are feeling like something's not right, just go and see a professional and get the right advice, and don't just Google it.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I probably didn't touch on the fact that, I'm in the middle of a course of physiotherapy treatment with an expert who is an expert actually on Achilles injuries. So, what that gives you in confidence, when you know you've got somebody that understands completely the injury that you've got, understands your goals, and where you want to be, and is working with you to achieve those. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. So that's it, episode 3, done and dusted. We hope you enjoyed and took some value from that. As always, if you have enjoyed it, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe tell your mate about it if you like, or not. But thanks, Mum. Thanks for your time again.
Thank you, son.
I'll see you
Very
next
welcome.
week.
Okay, see you next week. Take care.